Okay, you won't be able to message in the chat before we start, of course, because you will be busy, and that makes sense. Thanks. Alrighty, well, it is noon. We can let people in from the waiting room.
Cool. I'm meeting people now.
Alrighty, see them heading up. Okay, welcome to Aloha, everybody. So happy to have you all join us. I'm gonna do one song while we begin, while we wait for folks to join. Thanks so much for being here. Who taught you to grieve? Who dressed you for funerals? What would she say now? Who let you believe in hope for an afterlife? While Earth's closing down, while Earth's closing down. You feel cold while the world's heating. Rub your hands with idle dread. The air is ash and we keep breathing. Wondering what the forecast said. We'll ask the raccoon how she does it. Stays alive without dreams ahead. Surviving will always mean grieving. Somebody's here, then the others are dead. Who taught you to grieve? Who dressed you for funerals? What would she say now? Who let you believe in hope for an afterlife? While Earth's closing down, while Earth's closing down. Would it be sweet to acknowledge just how much you wanna live and the distance between what you'd offer and all this world still has to give? Can I accompany you through waves of blinding pain? Will lie in the darkness as the starlight waves? Let's become masters of feeling. Every stab of wounded hope and witness our final unwinding. Slow approach through a telescope. Who taught you to grieve? What would she say now? Who let you believe that Earth's closing down? Who taught you to grieve? What would she say now? Who let you believe that Earth's closing down? Well, Earth's closing down. Thank you all so much, and welcome to the Animal Liberation Online Assembly. We are a global community united for animal liberation, and I am so excited to have you all join us today. I'm going to share my screen really quick here, and we will get started. So my name is Eva Hamer, and I am your host today. Thank you all so much for being here. I will invite you all to share well, first, if you would like ASL interpretation, you can watch us on Facebook Live. This is the link, which is also in the chat. You can type it into your internet browser, and that will bring up Facebook, which will bring up a nice little view of Amanda, our ASL interpreter. It's a great resource to have. Thank you so much for being here, Amanda. You also have the option of pinning the ASL view. If you find the video on Zoom, you can pin that. You have options, but here it is. Facebook link for our ASL interpretation. And I also want to invite you to rename yourself, to include your name and your pronouns and your location. It's really great to be able to see where everybody is coming from and who all the people are who are coming to join us today. Also, really want to encourage you to turn on your video so we can really feel that sense of togetherness that we would have in an in-person conference. So I want to invite you to find the chat and engage with each other. You can talk to each other. You can see who else is on the call. You can even write a message to everybody and let us know where you're calling in from. It's so nice to see where everybody is in the world and see kind of how wide this community is. And just take a moment to center ourselves, to say, even though we aren't really between the same walls, we are in a room together here. And so let's just take a moment to arrive and smile and look around and feel some gratitude for the community that we have here, and really remember what unites us, and remember our cause of animal liberation. Of course, we want to uphold the same standards of community and conduct online, just as we would as we gather in physical spaces. So just know that anybody who is violating our code of conduct will be removed. And here we go. Today we're talking about China. Although many of us on this call are probably in the United States, and even though the United States is talked about as a leader in factory farming, industrialized animal farming is becoming commonplace throughout the world. Learning about the transition towards industrialized farming, which China experienced much more recently than the US, is going to help us keep our movement informed on the dynamics that influence systemic shifts towards and ultimately away from treating animals as property. So let's remember that we are in a movement which is a big and dynamic and diverse thing. It's not just one group, it's not just one language or one species. And the changes that we're fighting for aren't going to be won if they're only won in one country. It's our collective movement that together creates the conditions for change to happen. And so with that being said, before we hear from our guest, Tanya is going to tell us a little bit about some news that's been going on in our movement lately. So take it away, Tanya.
Hello, everyone. I am so excited to be here and to hear from our guest speaker. But first, I'll let you know about a few things that have happened in the world of animal rights lately. So first, a law just passed in Ohio requiring mandated reporters, including veterinarians, to report animal abuse the same way that they're required to report child abuse. And this law also required that law enforcement notifies social services if a child or senior lives with an alleged animal abuser. So this is important because it acknowledged animal cruelty as domestic violence and the close connection between violence against humans and other animals. And by governing the treatment of animal abuse and child abuse in the same bill, perhaps we get closer to a world where animals are thought of as worthy of the same protection as vulnerable humans. Also, the American Department of Transportation issued a rule that's going into effect in a couple of days, saying that airlines are required to recognize emotional support animals. And emotional support animals are different from service animals in that they aren't necessarily trained to perform any particular task. They are prescribed by a mental health professional or doctor to provide emotional support. And previously, emotional support animals were allowed to fly with a passenger for free on all US flights and weren't required to be in carrier or in cargo. And this change will make it much more difficult for many people to travel with companion animals and will make travel for animals more dangerous, requiring larger animals to be carried in cargo outside of view and protection of their human companions. And in response to the new rule, American Airlines announced that it will no longer accept emotional support animals on flights. And lastly, as we know, animal farming and pandemics are linked. Right now, India is having a terrible outbreak of bird flu age 5 and 8. States across India are taking emergency measures to prevent further spread. And this includes not allowing birds to be transported across state lines, and in some cases, killing whole flocks of domesticated dogs. But there's a silver lining, which is that this dilemma is forcing many people to look at animal farming and its relationship to pandemics, because we're all aware that our current pandemic was caused by animal exploitation and that future pandemics will be too. And this shows why it's an important moment for society to be thinking about about animals. And because as we move through on from this pandemic, we have an opportunity to be part of the conversation and talk about how we can truly prevent future pandemics.
Thank you so much, Tanya. And without further ado, we'll get to our guest for today's topic of conversation, the transformation of dairy in China. So Xiaoqian Hu is an associate professor of law at the University of Arizona. She received her SJD from Harvard Law School recently and was awarded the Young K. Kim 95 Memorial Prize for her work on property struggles in urbanizing China. She also received a PhD in comparative law and economics from Turin University in Italy and a master's degree in civil jurisprudence from an LLB from East China University of Political Science and Law. Her previous work explores the mutual opposition and attraction that tie US and Chinese law to each other. So with that, let's welcome Xiaoqian. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to share my slides. I hope this is the right screen. So can you see my slide right now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. I'm just so delighted to be here and also so humbled to be sharing my work with such a brave and determined group of animal justice fighters. As Eva explained, I am a law professor, but I am also a legal anthropologist. So I wear two hats. So as a legal anthropologist, I go and live in rural communities in China for extended periods of time. And then I observe how law affects the lives of people, of animals, and the conditions of the environment. So much of I would say all of the firsthand data that I will be sharing with you today come from my fieldwork in two Chinese counties, one in the mountainous south and the other in the northeastern plains. So you will be hearing some property, but not too much. Mostly it's about the legal anthropological work that I do in rural China. So when we talk about China's industrialization, there are certain images that are so common that they almost are cliche. So I'm just going to show you a few of these images. Okay, so the image on the top left represents the China that people would associate with, for much of the time until I would say the year 2000. That China back then was this rural, very poor, very agrarian and isolated society with hundreds of millions of people living, barely above starvation. And then the picture on the lower right then is a showcase image of China's economic success and industrialization. And this is an area in Pudong, it's called Pudong New District in Shanghai, which before 1992 was just a small fishing town. And then Pudong really is a symbolic example of China's integration into the global economy, of China's economic reform. And then there are a few numbers, statistics that are associated that would give I would say, an overview of China's industrialization. So again, there are images of migrant workers. I'm sure you are aware of this phenomenon that we buy clothes made in China, computers made in China, furniture made in China, and then you see these gleaming skyscrapers, and they are made by Chinese, migrant workers, men and women who come from rural China, who leave their rural homes and work in factories and on construction sites and far away from their home village. So these are the heroes of China's economic success. And another picture, again, a cliche picture of Chunyun, which means spring travels. So Chunyun, this is like in Western countries, people would go back home for Christmas and to spend their Christmas with their families. And the Chinese equivalent to Christmas is really the Spring Festival, the end of the lunar Chinese year. So that's when people, whether they're migrant workers or in typical middle-class urban office workers, they would travel back to their hometown, to their home village to spend 2 weeks with their family. So then that is the largest annual human migration every year, with hundreds of millions of people traveling, and as a result, more than 1 billion, travels just during those 2 weeks of time. So the number, I want to show you a chart. And again, this shows the scale of labor migration, for work in China from 1983, when China was just beginning to open up its economy, and to 2019. So we really see that in 1985, China really didn't have people who migrated from rural areas to work in urban areas. It was a very small number that was really close to zero. And then in 2019, that number almost approached 300 million. And that is a size larger than the entire US labor force. So that's the scale we're talking about. And then again, with demographic transformation, that in 1978, close to 800 million people lived in rural China. So that was, over 82% of the Chinese population, and 71% of the Chinese workforce was engaging in agricultural work. So they were in the agricultural sector. And in 2019, what we see is that really only roughly a third, 39% of the Chinese population lived in rural China, and only 25% of the labor force engaged in the agricultural sector. So what we see then is that as China industrializes, the rural labor force exits from the agricultural sector into the urban industrial sectors. So that's what has been happening in China. But what do these images and numbers mean for farm animals in China, and also for the global cause of animal protection and liberation more broadly? So that's what I will be talking about mostly today. So my talk is going to be divided into 2 parts. The first part with images and charts, and then the second part is more focused on law and challenges and opportunities. And then in the middle, we'll have Sally perform for us to break up the monotony of my talk. So So first of all, I want to give you an overview of what industrialization has meant for China's animal farming. So I will use 3 types of animals, mostly dairy cows. That's the area where I did most work in. And then the second type is the pig industry, because pork is the most popular meat in China. And then the third is poultry. So this chart shows the annual production of cow's milk in China between 1984 and 2019. And I want to say that historically, China was not a dairy nation. Cow's milk was not part of the majority Han diet. Instead, it was considered, quote unquote, barbarian. It was a food for cows and for people who lived in barbarian areas who were not Han. But then cow's milk was introduced to China between 1840 and I would say the first half of the 20th century. So during those 100 years, again, that's a story which will sound familiar to many of you here, closely related to colonization, to imperialism, to you can say expansion of the capitalist system to non-capitalist societies. So milk was introduced during that time to China as part of the, you could say, the importation of Western science, Western ideas, Western laws and institutions, and Western cultural practices. And it was considered to be a superior food, a food that would help the Chinese people to get rid of the label of the sick man of Asia. I'm sure some of you have heard of this label. So it was really part of that. And of course, in the West, in America in particular, milk at the time was also undergoing a transformation, that it was transforming from a substance or an alternative to mother's milk for babies to a popular food for the general population. So we can see historical parallels between China and the West back then. But that's an aside. So even in 1984, China's cow's milk production was very small. And then over the past 35 years, we see a 15-fold increase in China's cow's milk production. And of course, the actual consumption of dairy is even, has increased more than that because we have to include dairy imports every year. So that's, and then if we look at the number of dairy cows that are kept in captivity in China, we see a similar trend from 1984 to 2019. So at the peak, China had a near 15 million dairy cows on dairy farms producing milk for the Chinese consuming public. And then we see, starting from 2012, a gradual decline in the number of dairy cows in China. So that is a result of several factors. So one is the rising cost of labor in China and making Chinese dairy products more expensive. Again, that rising cost, I will say more about it later. It relates to the exodus of labor from rural China to urban China. And then there is the environmental protection that led to the closing down of many dairy farms, especially near populous areas. And then the third, and I would say the major factor really, is the imports of dairy products that are produced more cheaply or with heavier subsidies from government, from countries like the United States, Australia, New Zealand, and the EU more broadly. So we see this change, but then again, the Chinese consumption of milk is not going down. So that's an important factor to consider. And then pigs, again, as I mentioned, that pork occupies a special place in the Chinese diet. And pigs in general are the most prized domestic animals in traditional China. So you will see, culinary cuisine, much of the Chinese culinary cuisine is pork-based. And pigs also occupy special ritual and religious significance in China. If you go to rural China and then a person has passed away, and then there's a funeral held in that, and then you would often see a pig sacrificed. So there's that kind of sacrificial meaning to the pig as well. So again, we see the trend that China's pork consumption is going up. So every year, hundreds of millions of pigs are slaughtered to be consumed by the Chinese public. Again, when we talk about China's industrialization, we have to bear in mind that this is not a story just about China. It's a story about the global economy, because China has been so deeply integrated into the global economy. So this is a story that that has world ramifications. This picture captures a symbolic moment in China's industrialization, which was China's joining in the WTO in 2001. So what this meant was that, on the one hand, China gained access to markets, in the United States, in Canada, in Europe, in Australia, etc., and that allowed China to adopt an export-oriented manufacturing industry. That was China's industrialization story. But on the other hand, China also opened its own markets, particularly for agricultural producers from big countries like the United States, Brazil, Australia, New Zealand, and the European Union. So the story then is that when prices of milk or of other agricultural products are lower abroad, then China is going to import a lot of these products. So that's what happened with dairy. That we can see this chart produced by the USDA that around 2008, American milk price on average was lower than the Chinese price for milk. And the result was really a dramatic increase in milk imports of all kinds. So this chart only lists 3 types of milk powder products, but the same thing can be said of butter, of cheese, of condensed milk or liquid form milk, etc., of yogurt. So we see that 2008, excuse me, I hope you can see here my cursor. You can see dramatic increases in milk imports. And much of the import actually comes from the United States and also from New Zealand and Australia. And I want to say a few things about soybeans. As you know, soybeans feature so prominently in news reports, especially in 2018 and 2019, at the onset of the U.S.-China trade war. And soybeans, even though they are a crop, they have become a primary ingredient for animal feed. So 2/3 of the world's soybean exports go to China. 2/3 of the world's soybean exports go to China, mostly to feed animals in China. Dairy cows, beef cattle, pigs, chickens, etc. So we see again here that U.S. soybean prices, starting around 1995, have become lower, much lower than the soybean prices in China. So the result is not surprising that China has been importing huge quantities of soybeans from countries like the United States and also Brazil. So we see that, in fact, for all the soybeans that are used in China, today, the vast majority, over 80%, sometimes even 90% of the soybeans come from other countries. So that's huge. That has huge ramifications for cropland and for the environment. If you see the news of Brazil, of the Amazon rainforest being deforested to grow crops, very likely the land is for producing soybeans to be shipped to China. So we see the connections here. Okay, so these are the scale and the speed of China's industrialization and animal farming and animal consumption. So what does all of this mean? So first of all, what we see is that really China, this is a sense of scale. So China is the world's largest pork producer. China is the world's second largest chicken producer. China is the world's third largest dairy producer. China is the world's largest importer of dairy products, the world's largest importer of soybeans, the world's largest importer of chicken, and almost the world's largest importer of pork, trailing slightly behind Japan. So that's the scale. And as China industrializes, as more people are able to afford animal products in China, the consumption is going to go up. So as far as animal protection, the well-being of animals is concerned, things are going to get a lot worse before they can get any better. So that's really the bottom line here. There are 2 implications, immediate implications. So one is the global dimension of China's industrialization and increased consumption. That as far as farm animals are concerned, there are really no national borders. China is producing for the entire world, and the entire world is producing for China. So then what is happening is that some of these animals, even though they are raised and killed in China, there are more animals, more and more animals will be raised and killed outside China and then shipped to China to be consumed by the Chinese public. And that trend is going to continue, as I mentioned earlier. And the effect, the global effect, in fact, from industrialization in other emerging economies like India, like Vietnam, like Malaysia, Brazil, is the same. That we're going to see more consumption of animal products in the years to come. And I'm not blaming people in emerging economies, for increased consumption of animal products. In fact, people in developed countries have much higher per capita consumption of animal products. But again, the lesson is that we're in this all together. We're all in this together, whether it is about the perpetuation and expansion of animal abuse and exploitation, or about the effort to mitigate such abuse and exploitation. So there is no national borders, and that's the basic lesson. So the second immediate implication is for animal farming in China, for farmed animals in China. And then there are two questions. One, of course, is that since China is such a big animal producer, how are animals raised in China? And then the second question is, if so many rural Chinese people are leaving their rural homes to work in factories and urban service sectors, and then there are rural kids who grow up wanting to live an urban life, then who is going to farm? Who's going to stay behind to raise the animals on the farm? So these two questions are related because how animals are raised in China, to a large extent, depends on who is available to raise them. So I'm going to go to that question first about who stays behind to raise the animals on the farm. The pictures I'm showing here, these are pictures I took in the 2000s. They show snippets of a lively rural community. So the picture on the upper left is a wedding of a young couple. You can see that the whole village would gather in front of the groom's house, and different the mothers or daughters-in-laws from different families will come and cook a huge wedding feast for hundreds of people. So it's a community affair. And then the picture on the lower right is the birthday celebration of an elderly person who's not in this picture, but then this picture shows that everybody is there. There are people who are mothers, there are people who are toddlers, and there are teenagers, there are middle-aged men and uncles, there are grandparents. So for hundreds of years, everyone lived in their own village for their lifetime. Everyone was there the whole time, and they formed a lively community, close-knit. They helped each other. They hung out with each other. They worked with each other. And then they tended their their animals together. But that lively rural community is disappearing. It is disappearing for two reasons. One, of course, is the rapid industrialization, making factory jobs and urban jobs and urban life much more appealing to many rural people. And the second is really the imports of cheaper agricultural products from abroad that are destroying a lot of farm jobs in China. So then for people who even would prefer to stay home with their parents or their kids, they couldn't because farming was just not profitable. So now what we see, in fact, during my field work, I saw many people leave their rural homes, and I saw empty villages like this one. So you see that what used to be rice paddies right here, if you can see right here, are now overgrown with wild grass. People have left. And this is another picture of what used to be a stately rural house. And what you are seeing in this photo in particular was the ancestral hall of the family home. And for those of you who are familiar with the Confucian culture, you would know that the ancestral hall is the most important, the most sacred part of the family house. But you can see here that it's empty, the windows are gone, dilapidated, and there's even grass growing on the dirt floor because nobody's there. The house is left to dilapidate. And then who stays behind? In many villages, it is these elderly people. they stay behind because they can't find jobs in urban China. So then they, to the extent they're able, they will tend the family farm, they raise a few animals, chickens, ducks, even till the farm the rice paddies. To the extent they can't, they would just stop and buy food using the remittances sent home by their daughters or sons-in-law, by their sons and daughters-in-law. So that's the story that rural China is facing these dual challenges that people are leaving, and then agricultural jobs are not profitable. So then what is to do from the Chinese government's perspective? This is a challenge that has to be addressed, one for food security and the other for rural stability. So the strategy the Chinese government has been doing, and that has huge implications for farmed animals in China, is a strategy called agricultural industrialization. So basically in the past, families, they were farming their own plots. So this was a property system that was enacted in the 1980s called the household responsibility system, that allocated village land, individual plots of land, to individual households and for free for a period up to 30 years and could be extended indefinitely. So then the farm, the household would make their own farm decisions, would farm the land themselves, would keep the produce after paying taxes, etc. But then that type of farm was small scale, with pretty much no mechanization, and they would use a water buffalo to till the land, for example. But that model is no longer sustainable in China. So then the Chinese government is using laws and policies and subsidy incentives to transform that type of conventional farming to the type of farming shown in the picture on the lower right. In the picture on the lower right, I'm sure looks very familiar to you. This is the kind of farming that's the predominant model in the United States, is industrial farming, large scale, high mechanization, production purely for the market. Managed by a professional crew. So that's the type of farms that the Chinese government is promoting in China. What are the implications then for the farmed animals? So now I will say a few things about how animals are affected, how the way they were treated, they were raised on these farms changed in the past 40 years. So I would categorize this as three stages. The first stage was the starting point, how animals were raised conventionally. And then there was the middle stage where there was some production for the market, but the production was still done by the individual households. And then the last stage is family, is really corporate farming that is becoming increasingly hegemonic in China. So, okay, so the starting point, conventional animal farming. Again, I mentioned earlier that China was not a dairy nation. So the vast majority of rural Chinese families in the 1980s did not have a dairy cow. Instead, what they had was typically a water buffalo or a mule for tilling the land or for hauling things, say a cart. And again, this is how a water buffalo was used, and the buffalo would have a room to sleep in, and it would eat rice stalk or hay or grass, and there will be free grazing. For reproduction, there was of course no artificial insemination, and once a female water buffalo was pregnant and then gave birth, the calf would stay with the mother for at least a year, and maybe will stay in the family unless another family wanted to buy the young calf for future use. And then when the buffalo was too old to till the land, so the family would sell the buffalo to a butcher for a large sum of money. So some families, when they were financially able, would also keep the buffalo and let it die and bury it like a family member. But that was very rare because for a poor rural family, a water buffalo, so if sold to a butcher, would bring the family a large sum of money. So that was economically significant. And then, excuse me. So I'm going to talk about the pig again. Every Chinese household, rural Chinese household, would raise at least one pig. So these two pictures, they show how pigs were conventionally raised. You would see a pigsty, with an open courtyard, usually with dirt ground, for the pig to hang out during the day, and then an enclosed room for the pig to sleep in at night. And usually that room would have some hay or rice stalk to keep the ground dry and warm. For again, there was no artificial insemination, so the sow would get pregnant by mating with an uncastrated boar, and the piglets would spend at least the first 2 months with the sow before another family, bought them, or other families bought them. So pigs, they ate everything, leftovers from the family. They ate grass, they ate corn, sweet potatoes, pumpkin. So in China, there's an idiom called 猪食百草, which means that the pig eats 100 grasses or 100 plants, meaning that they really eat everything. And the pig manure then was used to fertilize the land. So what we saw was this kind of dynamic between the human life and the animal life, and the cycle. So there was very little that got wasted. There was very little pollution in that regard. And very importantly, about the slaughtering of the pig. So a pig would often live up to a year and then would be slaughtered at the end of the Chinese lunar year. And that would be a community fair, that every village would have a butcher. And then at the end of the Chinese lunar year, the butcher would schedule slaughterings on different days. And then when it was time to slaughter a pig, then that family, they would all come together. They would capture the pig. They would bind the pig to a door. They would kill the pig. And then the howling of the pig would be heard by everyone, by men, women, adults, children, by other pigs. And then the community and the neighbors would be invited to dinner to eat the freshly cooked, freshly slaughtered pig. I mean, these are graphic details, I'm sorry, but the whole idea also is that it was the same people who raised the pig, who killed the pig, and who ate the pig. And no parts from the pig were wasted, including the hair and the internal organs. Every part was used. And that's very different from today's, consumer society, where pigs are raised, or beef cattle, they are raised by one group of people, and then they're slaughtered by another group of people somewhere else. And then by the time the animal reaches the supermarket, it resembles nothing like an animal. It's so disassociated from the animal form that a meat eater would go to the supermarket and view that as food. I mean, the English language separates pork from pig and beef, from cattle. That kind of distancing then reduces the emotional room for empathy, and also the psychological cost of killing, that kind of externalization. But in this kind of conventional animal farming, everything is internalized. You see it, and then you endure it. Again, the last thing about chicken, again, this is how chickens were raised and ducklings were raised. And I also wanted to share a song. So this was a song that was sung when a family was killing a chicken. And the song, I can't actually sing it, but I have the lyrics translated. So it says, chicken, oh chicken, please don't blame me. In this world, you are a bowl of food. Take off your fur coat now, and you will change into a cotton coat. Chicken, oh chicken, please don't scream. So taking off your fur coat means that I'm killing you. You're taking off your feather, your fur. That's your fur coat, and you will change into a cotton coat. A cotton coat is something that a human would wear. So this song reflects the Chinese Buddhist spirituality of life cycles. That in this lifetime, a chicken, you are a chicken, and I am a human. But in the next life cycle, and you have suffered, you have served, and in the next life cycle, you will be a human, and maybe I will be a chicken. So that's the meaning of the song. So you see that the animals, they occupy a much richer cultural signification in these conventional societies. So again, then, as China's meat consumption went up, many more families were producing animals for farm. Last set of pictures of conventional farming. So this, the picture on the upper left was actually one of my favorite pictures from the field work. So the story, again, this is in northeastern China, close to Russia. So it's very cold there in the winter. And then these rural houses, they don't have modern heating. So basically they use brick to build beds, and then they leave these open tunnels that are connected to the kitchen stove. And that's the way of heating their beds for at night. So the bed is called kang, is a very important part of the household life. So this family, this woman put the duck eggs on the bed, covered with comforters so that the eggs would hatch. So that's how they were breeding ducklings. So you can see really this kind of intimacy between the human life and the animal life. So commercial farming, we see instead of a pigsty outside one's home, you see these separate buildings with tens of stalls or hundreds of stalls for pigs. Or for poultry, you see hundreds of them at a time in an enclosed courtyard. But still, if we think about CAFOs in the United States, these are nothing like CAFOs. So the animals will have some room. But then again, you also see the influence of industrial farming, that these animals, they cannot escape. They are enclosed, and then the food they eat mostly comes from industrial factory, animal feed, and also a lot more drugs and even hormones would be used on these animals. So here the animal doesn't really possess the religious or cultural or intimate, affective meanings to the grower anymore. And also the pollution from these from these family-run factories is enormous. You see odor, you see piles of manure polluting the water, really with no treatment. Same thing with dairy cows. That in the past it would be free grazing, just like how a water buffalo was raised. And then as the water buffalo gave way to a dairy cow or to a beef bull, then what you see is really this type of industrial farming, but done by individual households. But again, things are changing. So that brings us to the latest stage of animal farming in China, which is corporate farming. Again, these pictures, so they were taken from at a corporate dairy farm. And these pictures must be very familiar to you, so I'm not going to spend more time explaining. I do want to point out that the floors here are wet concrete floors. There are no dry beds for the cows. Higher rates of diseases, of infections, of mastitis, of milk, milk machine, and it's all about artificial insemination. but then again, the kind of CAFOs with thousands of cows or even tens of thousands of cows are still very rare in China. And also the kind of cramping that you would see in CAFOs in the United States is not common in China yet. I'm not saying that they will not happen in China, they could, and they may. So that's things are changing in China. And the last slides I want to show before I stop is really the percentage of dairy cows that are raised on farms, on larger farms. So this really shows farms with 100 head of cows or more. 100 head doesn't sound a lot by American standards, but you have to be aware that in China from the 1980s all the way to the early 2000s, 95% of China's cow's milk was produced by these so-called backyard dairy farms that had fewer than 10 cows. So that's a huge change. You see the percentage of large cows replacing small dairy farms. So I'll stop at that. And then we're going to hear from Sally some songs, and then I'll pick up the second half from there.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. That's so much to think about, and we'll pass it right to Sally to hear her song, which is called "How Beautiful We Are." Go ahead.
It's all so fascinating.
Okay, I want to take down my slides, but
sure.
It's not working. Let me see.
Let's see.
Oh,
here.
stop. Okay, here we go.
There we go.
Thank you. So Happy New Year, and this is my wish for us in the new year and in all of the coming years. It is, to your point, that we start to understand our connection with everyone and our connection with the planet and all the beautiful living beings that we share it with. And even if that takes us a long time to get there, I think that we will have that revelation. So, thank you. Take this off. When it's time to go, when all the grass and trees and dragonflies are but a storyline in faded pages of a children's book, they never knew the fantasy was real. But here we are, the last 100 of us standing together. If we'd have only known how beautiful. 'Cause we are. 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 'C
Thank you so much, Sally. That was, again, Sally Zito performing her song, How Beautiful We Are. And we will pass it right back to Xiaoqian for the second half of her talk.
I hope you would be the last fifth of my talk. That was beautiful. Thank you so much, Sally. So for the remaining minutes, I want to focus on two things. One is the legal landscape for animals in China, and then the other is the challenges and opportunities that animal activists face in China. So the legal landscape, I have to say, is rather disappointing, and very disappointing, I should say. Right now, there are three categories of laws that regulate in one way or another animals. So the first category includes criminal law and property law. So here it's all about animals as property. And I'm sure many of you, and all of you, I would say, are familiar with the critique that the property status of animals lies at the heart of animal suffering. So that is a critique that applies very well in the Chinese context. Because in Chinese property law, property is about the relationship between the owner and the thing that's owned. And then within this sphere, the owner's power is absolute. So then in Chinese property law, there are protections saying that you cannot steal or damage or kill others' property, animals. And if your damage is serious enough, you will be criminally prosecuted. But again, that says nothing about the animals when there is a conflict of interest between the animals and their human owners. So that's the first category of laws. The second category of laws give some legal protections to animals. So I'll list three major ones. So the first one is the wildlife protection law that concerns wild animals, in particular endangered species. But it says nothing about farmed animals, for sure, for one. And then the second type of laws regulate lab animals. So there's actually, this is mostly government regulations that say that lab animals should be fed clean and safe food and clean water, and lab staff could not abuse or harass lab animals. So that's the really only type of legal protection that I know that concerns you can say welfare of animals in captivity. And then there's another legal protection. It's from the pig slaughter management regulations. It says that slaughterhouses and other entities are prohibited from injecting water or other substances into pigs. I mean, this can be considered as legal protection for the pigs, but then again, the motivation for this protection is to save food quality. So that's pretty much, in terms of animal protection, goes. That's all there is. And then there's a third category of laws that regulates animals. They include animal husbandry law or food safety laws, public health laws such as animal epidemic prevention laws. But these laws, they regulate animals. In fact, it's human handlers of animals from economic, food security, food safety, public health perspectives. They say nothing about the well-being of the animals themselves. So in that regard, there is really no legal protection of animals for the animals' own sake. And we see this actually in the past 2 years with the African swine fever, that over 100 million pigs in China either died from the disease or were culled to prevent the stem of the epidemic. And the same thing with COVID, that when there were suspicions that that COVID originated from the wet market in Wuhan, there were a lot of wild animals that were had been captured for human consumption, they were slaughtered. And the same thing happened when SARS broke out in 2001. So animals could be, so in that regard, it's all about human safety. So then really there is no anti-animal cruelty law in China, even for companion animals. There's no general animal welfare law in China. There were past efforts that tried to enact such a law. And in fact, last year in the spring, there was this renewed effort to put an animal welfare law or animal protection law on the legislative agenda, and then that failed. So that's the legal landscape. As you can see, the legal landscape itself poses a huge challenge to animal activists in China. So now I'm going to talk about the challenges. So I'll just mention 4 types of challenges, but in real life, there are many more challenges that animal activists face in China. So the first challenge is really the widespread public resistance to the notion of animal welfare, let alone animal rights. And the reason for this resistance is that many people believe that China is still a very poor country, and there are a lot of people, hundreds of millions of people, who still live a rather impoverished life. So then to these people, they feel that now we can't even protect the welfare of human beings. Why are we talking about protecting the welfare of the animals? So this kind of discussion resembles very much the kind of public opinion and government opinion in the 1990s about environmental protection. That at that time, a lot of people thought that environmental protection was a luxury notion, a notion that was imposed by a few urban elites or by Westerners on a poor China, trying to stem China from developing further. But now that resistance is largely gone. So the animal welfare notion is in a similar state. And in fact, a prominent animal activist and animal scholar in China, Chang Jiwen, participated in the drafting of an anti-animal cruelty ordinance for the Beijing municipal government in the 2000s. And then when the draft was posted online for public comments, Chang Jiwen received a lot of phone calls, emails, letters threatening him, accusing him, harassing him of disregarding the lives of humans in favor of the lives of animals. And obviously that ordinance never came to pass. So the same thing with a draft animal protection law in China. It's circulating on the internet, but then it's going nowhere. So this is kind of public resistance. But the second challenge comes from market forces, and this is particularly salient for farmed animals. So the idea is that if we increase the welfare of farmed animals, that's going to make animal products even more expensive. And then a lot more agricultural jobs will be destroyed. So that's the trade pressure, the second challenge. And the third challenge is the political environment of activism in China in general. And so I'm sure you know some of this from reading the news in the media. So if we look at contentious politics in China, and particularly in recent years, we really see two patterns here. So one is that the kind of tactics that activists adopt matters. And the second is that the kind of substantive issues that the activists are fighting about matters. So let me explain what that means. So if we look very broadly, we see that moderate tactics that do not engage large-scale open confrontation or demonstration or organization that transcends the local boundary that involves multiple cities or multiple provinces. So if the tactics are moderate and then does not involve that kind of mobilization, and then the tactics are designed to shape public opinion, build public support, and through that to influence law and policy change, then there is much higher chances that such tactics are tolerated by the government, and in some areas even succeed in fostering legal change. But if the tactics are drastic, are open, confrontational, involving multi-local mobilization, coordination that demand immediate drastic change, then they're much likely to be met with immediate government suppression and also demonization and political marginalization. So that's a challenge that animal activists in China face, that and also activists of other kinds face. So they have to adopt moderate, conciliatory, one little step at a time approach. And in terms of the substantive issues, so in China, there are some issues that are just taboo issues listed by the, in the eyes of the Chinese government. An example right now would be the labor treatment, the treatment of Uyghurs in Xinjiang. So that would be a taboo subject. Another taboo subject would be the origins of COVID in China. So these are just some examples. And what constitutes a taboo subject may change over time. So right now, animal activism in China mostly concerns companion animals, and dogs as food, for example, and also certain wild animals as food. So these do not, right now they're tolerated by the government. You don't see a lot of activism for farmed animals yet, or for dairy cows or pigs. You do see a scholarly discussion of that, but you don't see a lot of that in the public discourse. So that's the third challenge. And the fourth challenge really comes from the law, from the property status of animals, and the animals are not considered legal subjects. So if between the owner and the animal that's owned, the owner's right is absolute, that gives very little room for the government, for lawmakers to step in and restrict the owner's property rights. And also in China, a long story short, in order to be recognized as a person in the law, the candidate would have to possess its own will and would have to have a way of expressing its own will in a way that's incontrovertible, that's intelligent, intelligible to the humans. So then we run into a problem for animals, that even if we could prove that animals or some animals possess their own will, animals do not speak the human language. And as a result, expression of their will becomes a problem, a huge obstacle to recognize personhood for animals in the law. So these are the four types of challenges. I also want to say a few words about opportunities. Again, I'll list four categories of opportunities that are related to these challenges. So the first opportunity is that despite the widespread resistance to the notion of animal welfare, that resistance is weakening. So as more people become affluent, become economically able to afford higher prices for animal products that are produced in greener, more environmentally friendly, more animal friendly ways. And then also the urban youth, they do not live on the farm and they live with stuffed animals, with cartoons. So then there's room for public education. There's room for urban reception to the notion of animal welfare. And that, I see that as the biggest opportunity. So through this kind of activism, through shaping or reshaping public opinion to enhance public consensus around animal protection. And so the second opportunity, again, that goes to trade pressure. There's another side to the trade pressure, which is that some scholars and animal activists actually say that that one reason China cannot export its animal products to countries like to the European Union or to North America is because in these jurisdictions there are laws protecting or regulating how animals should be minimally treated. And because China doesn't have laws regulating how farmed animals are treated, China cannot export animal products to these countries. And if China enacted laws to give some minimum humane treatment to farmed animals, then that would allow Chinese agricultural producers to export their animal goods to the EU. So you see that this is a mixed opportunity in the sense that you may increase the welfare of farmed animals through legislation and enforcement of new laws, but then you would encourage more production and as a result the suffering of more animals. So it's a mixed opportunity. And then the third one is about animal protection and anti-abuse law. I mentioned that there's no such law in China, and then also the political environment of activism these days could be tricky, that there is strong anti-West sentiment in China in recent years, and I think the feeling is in some ways mutual. So that's going to make a specific tactic that some animal scholars and activists had been adopting tricky. So the tactic that many of them were adopting in the past was to say, see, Europe has these, or Germany has this constitution that recognizes animal rights, or Britain has these minimum treatment laws for sows, for veal calves, etc., and then we should have them too. Now it's harder to make such an argument, but then again, there is room. So in a way, it requires art in words or diplomacy. And one way that some animal scholars and activists have been saying is that that in China, in the traditional Chinese culture, protection of animals has a long tradition, going back to Confucius. I know everything going back to Confucius, then that's Chinese as well. So it's not a Western thing to protect animals. It's a Chinese thing as well. And it's the right thing to do. And China, if you want to be a truly great nation, if you want to be a global leader, responsible, progressive, then you have to enact laws that protect animals. So that's the kind of rhetoric that I see I see being used in China, sort of to incentivize, to shape how the discourse of animal protection. And the last opportunity I would say is that, yes, right now there are these laws that give minimum legal protections to animals are laws enacted to ensure food safety, food security, or public health or environmental protection. But I still want to say that there is room to do both, to enhance the treatment of animals and to protect public safety, to enhance food security, or to protect the environment. So the treatment of manure is one that would make at least the animals in captivity live in a cleaner environment. The same thing with excessive cramping or with excessive drug use, hormonal use, etc. So these are some of the opportunities, and of course, environmental protection would have huge impact on wildlife. So that's another avenue for improvement. So I'm just going to stop right here, and I would love to hear your thoughts and questions.
Thank you so much. That was so illuminating, and we have a few questions in the chat, and I'll kind of read them out. And also, if folks want to ask more questions, you can feel free to throw them in the chat there. So we have a few people kind of asking more about the climate crisis angle and sort of how well is this being spread throughout China? How much does China, when making climate policy, sort of acknowledge that the role of animal agriculture in hurting the climate?
Oh, that's such a great question, and it's such a hard question. So the Chinese government is serious with climate change, and I think that rightly so. But from their point, there's also the strategic importance, because climate change is the only, I would say, the only you can say avenue for the Chinese government to gain or to gain some international trust and credibility. So they're being dead serious about it. And in terms of the impact it has on animal farming, I see really mixed impact. On the one hand, I see climate change and climate change and also environmental protection. These are related. So by environmental protection, I mean the protection of land, of water, of air. So then I see the closing down of many small dairy farms and the prohibition of free grazing. So then dairy cows, they have to be cramped in these sheds or in fenced in courtyards. They lost their freedom. So that's a negative impact. And then I have to say that in terms of CO2 emissions, and this is actually I think this is a conflict, really, a conflict between animal protection and environmental protection, that CAFOs, as devious as evil as they are, they actually, in terms of greenhouse gas emission per animal, CAFOs actually have lower emissions than free-range animals. So I could see that as hurting farm animals in China as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, one we don't often fully acknowledge. Now, we know that a lot of animal advocates in the US kind of start out by becoming vegan because they're interested in their health and sort of finding out about animals through there. And there's a question from Claire, kind of how much is that sort of commonplace in China, this interest in veganism from a health standpoint?
Oh, hard. In China, so much of Chinese cuisine is meat-based. And this is very hard for me as an anthropologist, because when I go to rural China, if I tell people I don't eat meat, they would say, well, I don't know what to cook for you. So then when I do field work, and also some families, they don't even have vegetable oil. They use lard to cook. So, and in the north, they would, because it's very cold there, they would have to cook everything together in a big pot. And I didn't want to put them in a situation, so then I would have to eat the meat contaminated vegetables. So that's the situation. If you go to restaurants in China, you have to be very careful. Even if you think that you're ordering a vegetarian dish, it would come with eggs, it would come with chicken broth, it would come with shrimp, whatever, or ground pork, whatever. So there's no societal veganism, noticeably. And if you tell people you are a vegan, they would say, "Are you a Buddhist?" The two are almost synonymous in China, and some people are vegetarian. There is a trend, and I view this trend with very mixed feelings, of girls wanting to reduce their consumption of meat in order to stay slim. And again, that would have huge consequences for the girls themselves and for feminism in China. So I don't really see a growing any influence, crossing over from veganism to animal protection, period. Maybe will change, but not now.
Okay, good to know. And we have a question from Marina. Does China have a policy regime that massively subsidizes animal farming the way that the US and Canada does, where the government will actually kind of fund it?
No. Well, actually, yes and no. So what I mean by yes is that the Chinese government doesn't, it does give subsidies to help to help create these large-scale, highly mechanized farms. But the subsidies mostly are in the area of building infrastructure. So building roads, for example, or leveling land, or subsidizing the purchase of machines. And the reason is that, believe it or not, when China joined the WTO, it had to negotiate its own subsidy policy with major agricultural players like the United States, Canada, and the European Union. And before that, China was too poor to subsidize its agriculture. In fact, at that point, it was agriculture subsidizing urbanization in China. So then China had a very low starting point. And if you look at the WTO, subsidy system, you see that their subsidy reduction commitments are calculated based on their prior subsidy levels. So what then ends up happening is that China is giving and is allowed to give only smaller amounts of subsidies to individual farmers, whether they're dairy farmers, animal farmers, or not. That said, the Chinese government is increasing subsidies in other names, in categories that they can argue as allowed within the WTO system. And of course, there could be violations, but then that's the general framework. So that's why I would say that my answer is no.
And Dean is asking, this might kind of go on the veganism question, but do you see any future for plant-based meats or clean meats, beyond meat, et cetera, as an opportunity to reduce animal farming in China?
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of similarity between urban consumers in China and urban consumers in the United States or Canada or Europe, in the sense that people want safer meat, want meat produced with less environmental harm, and then also, as I mentioned, that there are. It's not that Chinese people are they don't care about animal suffering. It is that that is not a high priority, but that could change. So in that regard, if there's plant-based meat available that tastes similar to real meat, then there will be a market for it. And I think that would be huge because the Chinese buying public is huge.
And when at the very beginning of your talk, you showed all these graphs of consumption and production of dairy in China over the time, and there were some really interesting dips kind of towards the end. And I wondered if you would, a few people were wondering if you would speak to some of those.
Okay, so let me try to find the dips. Oh, let me see. I have a dip in dairy cows. Is that what the?
Yeah, there's a reference to a dip in dairy in 2014, I think, and then I think someone else also mentioned kind of recent years, right? So we see kind of pretty big dip there.
Oh yeah, so I actually don't know what happened specifically in 2004. Again, as a legal anthropologist, I looked at the impact of that dip. So but between 2008 and 2013, those 5 years were turbulent years for the Chinese dairy industry because of the 2008 melamine milk scandal. So then, a long story short, dairy merchants, dairy farms, and dairy processing companies, they were complicit in adding melamine, which was a nitrogen-rich but toxic chemical, in diluted milk to cheat the very sketchy milk inspection quality that was in place at the time. So I view that as largely, I would say, a self-interested but unwise solution to the rising dairy prices in China and the imports of cheaper dairy products from abroad. But then that scandal broke out, and then infants were were dying, and hundreds of thousands of them were hospitalized. And you have to imagine in China with the one-child policy, the obsession, the enhanced obsession of the Chinese public with infant health and youth health. So that's it really touches like the most important thing that Chinese parents care about. The single most important thing. So then there was a huge public distrust in the Chinese dairy sector, and that also resulted in a reshuffling of China's dairy industry with massive foreign investments, foreign takeovers, and many smaller dairy processing companies were shut down. So then those years were very uncertain for Chinese dairy farmers as well. And I would say, based on my limited knowledge, the huge drop in 2013 was an example of market fluctuations after that, as a result of that. But then the steady drop in dairy consumption, in dairy herd, is, as I mentioned, three factors: the rising cost of labor, making dairy unprofitable, and then the increase in dairy imports, and then the tightening of environmental regulations. So what you see then is that small family-run dairy farms are closed down, and then their dairies were slaughtered as beef, for beef, and they just stopped producing new dairy cows.
We have a question from Emily. What can we do as Americans to help raise awareness and bring these issues to light? Do you have any call to action, any ask of us?
Well, thank you for that question. What you are doing here helps, because as I said, that consumption is global. It's a global event, that animals are being produced here to feed people in China. So that's one. Another, I would say, is, to the extent you can, make your website, make a Chinese language version of your website. I think that would be very helpful to help people in China access of the information and the kind of wisdom and tactics you are using. And also, I think, in particular, talking about veganism, and just to explain what veganism is about, what choices you have. In China, if you want to be a vegan, you will be faced with very limited choices. I have to eat, tofu and vegetables the whole time. So what can I do? So you have to make vegan feasible. And I would say two more things. One is trade law. One is agricultural subsidy law. And again, these are fights that we're doing here already, especially with farm subsidies. So keep doing that great work. And trade law, let me say a few words about it. That higher, animal protection standards can be recognized as a trade barrier in violation of the WTO system. But if it's done well with good faith, then it is not. And that's the leverage that countries, a large market like the United States or the EU, they have. So advocating for that kind of animal protection certification as a condition for accepting imports, animal product imports from China, I think that's something that would be very useful too.
I'm seeing a lot of enthusiasm for translating the website to, so we'll see how quickly we can get that together. So we have time for just a couple more. And Griffith is asking, even though about 95% of Chinese people cannot digest lactose, the Chinese government's food guidelines recommend people eat 3 servings of dairy per day. Do you think this is due to increase in dairy production or influence from other nations' food guidelines or something else?
This is a phenomenon that's so common, in China, for indigenous peoples, in the Caribbeans, in Asian countries, including Japan. So dairy, and this goes all the way back to the cultural signification of milk, and milk being portrayed as a superior food, as a food that has rich nutritional contents that would build, strengthen the bodies of Chinese citizens or of Japanese citizens or whatever. Lactose intolerance, I would say the vast majority of Chinese people don't even know that they're lactose intolerant. That concept is not in the public discourse, and the government has interest in suppressing that information. Well, I mean, in not publicizing that information. So in that regard, and also I frankly don't know much about the science of lactose intolerance, because it seems that people who, Asian people, they are not, when they consume dairy, they're consuming dairy not at the same pace as Americans consume dairy, I have to say. So then their dairy consumption is so very little, and I don't really hear from them about terrible consequences. They might have bloating, but then they think that it's still good. I think in that regard, public education again is useful.
Absolutely. And just a couple more. Are there any animal rights groups in China that you would like to shout out, suggest that we make a connection with?
Oh, I should have looked into that. I could actually give you a few names after. I don't have them on hand, but I could email you.
Sure. Yeah, you can email me, and I can post in the event page and let folks know after the fact.
I do want to say, sorry to this may disappoint you. This is a time when connections with this kind of institutional connections with foreign activist groups cannot be, I mean, could actually harm activist groups in China, and especially for activist groups from the United States. So, so in that regard, we have to find a safer and effective way to make that connection. That's why I suggested language websites, so that they could get information without seeming institutional collaboration. But talking to them informally, hear what they think would be feasible ways, I think that can still be done.
That makes a lot of sense, and so important to make sure we're not causing harm when trying to help. And I'll just give one more, and just kind of interested. Priscilla's asking how you sort of got interested in this whole subject, if there's a way to say that kind of briefly, and also is there a way that people can follow your work? Any thing you'd like to plug towards the end here?
Thank you. So I got interested in in the lives of animals from my focus on rural China, and again, the kind of traditional rural life that I saw was really one in which humans, animals, they occupy, and the land, they were very intimate with each other. I don't want to romanticize that lifestyle, for many, many reasons. But then comparatively speaking, the kind of industrial animal farming causes so much more suffering. And it's not friendly to the animals. I mean, to say it lightly, it's not friendly to the farmers either, and it's not friendly to the environment. So that's where I see the connection, and also I view animals as sentient beings. I think that's a moral upbringing. I grew up in rural China, so I experienced that kind of slaughtering every year. I internalized that trauma. So when I realized that vegetarianism or veganism could actually be an option for a non-Buddhist person, I adopted that. And I don't think animals are food. So that's the personal connection that got me interested in animals. So I forgot the second part of your question.
Is there a way that people can follow your work?
Oh, people can follow my. I'm actually writing this piece about the critique of animals. I hope to do more field work in rural China, but with COVID, I don't know when I will be able to do that again. But if I can, yes, I will keep producing. And check the website, the faculty website, and then you will see some work there. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for all of the information. That was extremely illuminating, and I'm hearing a whole lot of appreciation in the chat. And yeah, just a huge thank you, Xiaoqian, for taking the time to inform us today.
Well, thank you so much for having me. And again, I commend and I admire the work you do. Thank you for including me here. And so now I'll be a member of the audience. And
Wonderful. Well, yeah, definitely stick around because we'll be hearing from Cheyenne is going to give us a performance of her song. And I will just pass it straight to Cheyenne.
Thank you, Eva. Hi, everyone. I'm Cheyenne, and I wanted to play a song that I wrote for you. Before I play it, I just want to give a little context. So 2 summers back, a few busloads of us went to Sonoma County to Wright Car Duck Farm and participated in a mass open rescue. And some people chained themselves to the slaughter line, others blocked the gates of the slaughterhouse and held dead ducks in their arms as the world bear witness to the horrific acts that were taking place in those factory farms. And as part of the action, we planted lavender seeds in front of the slaughterhouse, and an activist friend of mine named one of the ducks Lavender because of that. And when I got back to Berkeley, I wrote a song for Lavender, and now I'm going to play that song for you. This is called Lavender's Lullaby, and I hope you like it. Took a bus out of the city to where you live, where it's always sunny. But I know what goes on here ain't always pretty. Blue skies and blue shirts, white clouds, white letters. I swear you had never seen all of those colors till they're in the dumpster. You lie with your brothers and sisters. You wonder what all this is for. Oh, but wonder no more. How can a county with so much beauty be home to your pain and drudgery? I'll tuck you in where the green hills roll. Sleep, darling, sleep, where the wild, wild lavenders grow. I watched as he carried you out in his arms. There by his chest, you finally found rest. Your feathers stained red, they ruffle like flowers in the wind. You wonder what all this is for. Oh, but wonder no more. How can a county with so much beauty be home to your pain and drudgery? I'll tuck you in where the green hills roll. Sleep, darling, sleep, where the wild, wild lavenders grow. Sleep, darling, sleep, where the wild, 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 wild lavenders grow. Took a bus out of the city to where you live, where it's always sunny. But I know what goes on here ain't always pretty. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Cheyenne. That was beautiful. I have goosebumps. Wow. Very, very wonderful song. Thank you so much. And next, we will hear from Curtis. Curtis has been managing DXE's TikTok and has been doing research on best practices of the platform. And Curtis is going to tell us a little bit about what he's learned and how we can apply it to do good work for animals ourselves. And so I will invite Curtis to unmute and take it away.
All right, can y'all hear me here?
We can.
All right, sounds good. Wow, well, I feel like first I need to decompress from that song, and I feel like a lot of others do too, but try to like get out of that mind space and push on here. So good job with that song, and thanks for the presentation, Xiaoqian. All right, so what I'm gonna be going over today is TikTok for animal rights, but this presentation, you could probably apply it to any sort of business or other thing that you're trying to promote with regards to social media. So we're going to answer a few questions today. What is TikTok? How can I use it? And then also, why should I bother? So, there's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and I know that a lot of us sometimes can feel overwhelmed with, posting on social media and, oh my gosh, another platform. Do I really need to get on another social media platform and invest more time in something else? And so my goal here, personally, just to be upfront, I'm trying to sell you on this and get you to download it and start using it, because I think it's, we have a unique opportunity here to reach a lot of people. All right, so there's a beautiful picture of yours truly there. Let's see here. This is what some of the interface looks like. Also, just put up a star in the chat if you've downloaded this and or are using it already. Or type something if type something I'm not using it if you're not. All right, so the best explanation I can give you as to what TikTok is, it's kind of like a combination of Vine, if you remember that app from the early 2010s, mid 2010s, YouTube and Instagram. It's just a continuous video feed. It's not just people dancing. There's an incredible organic reach, and I'll go over what organic means here in a little bit. There's also editing features in the app. So you can, like, my face is kind of blurred up here. So there's ways that you can edit, kind of like iMovie or Final Cut Pro, kind of inside the app while you're posting it. A lot of different things you can kind of manufacture with your video, and it almost feels gamified. And when I say gamified, not like playing a video game in a traditional sense, but it just feels like you're just, trying to innovate and do new things to get more views and more likes and more interaction. And the whole app is kind of set up in that way. And just real quick, some statistics. It has 2.6 billion downloads right now. 60% of the users are under 30, which is, we're trying to promote animal rights and we're trying to get to younger people. There's a lot of younger people on here. Many times the top trending songs, and I'll get more into that, trending songs, also trend in other places too, like Spotify or YouTube Music or Google Play. So this is having social impacts in other areas of life. The average person uses this app like an hour a day, and teenagers even higher, like 80 minutes a day. So people are really engaged with this that are on it. All right, so we're gonna go over a couple case studies here. Everybody know who this is? Yay, nay? My love don't cost a thing. Yep, J-Lo, good job. All right, some people got it. All right, so she posted a video, it was in March on Twitter. She had 45 million followers there. She posted the same video on TikTok. She has 5 million followers. The same video on Twitter got 2 million views. The same video on TikTok got 71 million views. And she has, you know, not nearly as many followers comparatively. As of today, as of today, she doesn't have any change in her number of Twitter followers, and her TikTok followers are up to 12 million. All right, now this next person. I'll be impressed if anyone knows who this is. Anybody? Oh, all right, a couple people in the chat here. Dogface, yep, dog. All right, his real name is Nathan Apodaca. And yes, his TikTok handle is 420 Dogface 208. And near the end of, I believe it was September or October, he posted a video of himself on TikTok on a skateboard, drinking ocean spray, playing a Fleetwood Mac song. I believe it was Dreams. This video has since, the views are up to 78 million. What this did for Fleetwood Mac was their album Rumors went back in the Billboard top 10 40 years after it was posted. 33 million people purchased their album, most of them digitally, and most of them younger people that had never heard of Fleetwood Mac up until that point. It was the top 20th most popular song on Spotify. So again, like the engagement and the social impacts this is having are enormous, and it's going to continue to grow. The last time that I can think of, there was a time in social media history, which isn't that long in human history, maybe 15 years, where someone was able to connect with people that they've never seen, never met in real life, that they're not, that they don't know, was maybe when YouTube first came out. Like if you made a YouTube account right when it first came out, there wasn't a ton of people on it. Your work was able to be seen by a lot of other people. And this is where we're at right now with TikTok. It's even greater than that. Your ability for people to see your work right now, since it's still new, is just enormous. And for an activist, I think this is the platform that where we need to be and where we need to start transitioning. Okay, so the For You page, or the FYP. So this stands for You page. It's kind of a manufactured list of videos that you're going to view when you're on the app. It learns your watch behavior, things such as how long you've watched a video, have you commented, have you liked it, have you shared it, and it's going to feed you more videos similar to the ones that you've been watching. And this is where we want our videos to show up when we post. We're trying to get our videos to show up on other people's For You page. Let's go to the next thing here. All right, so the trends. You need to keep up with the trends. So unlike Twitter, where you pretty much just have trending hashtags, and same with Instagram, you have hashtags. We have trending hashtags. We have trending music, and we also have trending effects. So you can add music to your videos, like copyrighted music. TikTok has some deal with, where there's tons of music from mainstream artists that you can add to your videos. There's also effects, like earlier you saw the My Silly Face that you can add in there. It's other things such as green screen effects that you can add to videos, and sometimes these effects and music sounds will trend just like hashtags would. And a lot of these trends come and go very quickly. Normally I check that every day before I post, but you probably, if you're posting regularly, you want to check, I would say, at least every week. And if anyone has any questions, please post them, because I've got 2 computer screens up here, so I'm kind of trying to look at the chat as well as I'm going through here. Let's go to the next slide here. All right, so I would tell you to start posting. Now, I don't have any definitive data on this, but I sense that the first post that you make on TikTok, they push it higher into people's For You page. It has a higher likelihood of being seen by more people. So I would recommend posting something kind of vitriolic, you know, an encounter with police or some kind of crazy protest, because it will have a chance of getting seen by more people. Film something interesting, use a combination of different hashtags. So something that's really niche, you know, like vegan or plant-based, and then something more broad, you know, animals, or, you know, maybe even food if you're trying to get seen by the opposition. And then pay attention to the trending things, because a lot of times I'll just throw a trending hashtag in there, even if it's not really related to the content, just so it shows up on people's For You page. You can, the app seems to reward a lot of videos. So if you want to throw videos at it 3 to 6 times a day, go for it. It's not going to slow your account down, or they're not going to penalize you for posting a lot. I would wait a little bit of time between though. And include a call to action. And this is true to any kind of video. At the end of it, it might be, you know, visit this website, or click the link in our bio, or take this action at the end of the video to make people feel more engaged. Anybody know who this person is? Yeah, she's a real hooligan. So Cassie's videos on our TikTok page, which are very mild, they don't seem to like them because there's little bits of gore in them. So unlike Facebook and Twitter or Instagram, they do not tolerate any kind of blood, gore, animal violence at all. They will flag the videos. So that's something that you need to be aware of. Now, you can submit an appeal, and a lot of times they will overturn them taking the video down. So that's totally okay. Don't delete the video, submit an appeal, and it may get put back, and then it may end up going viral. So if they flag your video, it's totally fine. It doesn't seem to be penalizing anybody from what I've seen. So don't worry about that. If you don't like engaging with trolls, or you're easily upset from people leaving, you know, bacon comments, or animals are yummy, or I love it when the pigs suffer type of comments, this platform may not be for you, because there are a lot of those types of comments. Some other, let's see here, other tips. If you, on my phone, I use this app called InShot. It's kind of like a mini version of Final Cut Pro, like a more serious editing app on your phone. You can also edit in the TikTok app itself as well. There's another app called Quick App, made for mobile video editing, that's made by the same people that do the DJI drones. Let's see here, go back. iMovie, if you have a Mac, is nice. Final Cut Pro. I'd also recommend using something such as Linktree, Solo, or Contact in Bio. The pictures here to the left of other tools, that's where you will go if you click the link in DXE's Instagram or TikTok bio. And then it's an easier way for people to get to the petitions, or watch a video, or even follow other social media accounts. So I definitely recommend everyone having something like that in their bios here. And let's see here, we'll go to the last slide. And we know who that is. Well, it says his name there, that's not fair. It's not really fun, very interactive. So yeah, so have fun. Like I said, doesn't seem to be any penalties for violation of posts. It's still an incredibly new platform. And as I mentioned before, the organic growth potential on this platform is still insane. I had a video myself earlier in the summer that reached like 800,000 views, and I only had 200 followers at that time on my personal page, and I gained like 800 followers that one day. Repost old videos, it's totally fine. Whether they're yours or someone else's, it doesn't matter. And just experiment with just different sounds and hashtags. It's totally okay. I put some extra resources here. I'll provide this slideshow to anybody if they want it. Let's see here. Oh, and you can get a hold of me if you have any other questions. And that's my social media handle for all of my accounts: Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Facebook, everything. I don't know how I'm doing on time here.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Curtis. And how can people follow DXU's TikTok?
It's the same. It's just direct action everywhere on TikTok, and you can also, it's solo.to/DXE for the DXE page. And if somebody wants to put in the chat, is there a way for people to get a hold of the social media team email? I can put it in there too.
Sure.
And we would love to, if you have any questions and want to get going on this, we'd love to help.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Curtis. I think that's really, really useful stuff. And I know that TikTok is an amazing way to get a lot of people involved and a lot more people seeing the message than would see otherwise. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, we have come to the end of this assembly today, and I want to thank all of you so much for being a part of it. Especially want to take a moment to express gratitude again for Xiaoqian and Tanya and Sally and Cheyenne and Curtis and Amanda, our ASL interpreter, and everyone else, large team behind the scenes who works to help make this possible. And finally, we have a borrowed tradition at the end of these calls. It's called the Unity Clap. Started with the United Farm Workers movement in the 60s as a way for their members to show solidarity across language divides that separated them. And at the end of each day, the workers would start the Unity Clap, which symbolized solidarity with allies in their common struggles, to emphasize that as allies, we rise and fall together. Despite all the barriers between us, we are united. Remember that you are part of a movement, you're part of a global community, and we are rising together. So the clap starts off slow, gets faster and faster, and we will end with one final clap. And we are going to unmute you all now so you can hear the chaos of this final exercise. And after the last final clap ends, the assembly will be over. So we will unmute everybody now. Gamir can do that. All righty. And here we go. And thank you all so much for joining us. We will see you next month and next time. Have a wonderful day. Bye.
Bye.
Good night. Thank you so much.
Bye.
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 Hasta la vista. Adiós.
Well, yeah, if someone got vaccination.